RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today and joining us here for our live stream. We're going to have a lot of fun today talking the ag commodity markets. Today's guest is Wendy White. We're going to get to her in a second. I want to mention, if you do have any questions market related, because I'll tell you what, today was a great day in the markets. As they say, a lot of green on the screen today, so it's a fun day to talk markets with Wendy. If you have any questions for her, you can enter them in the comment box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. More questions, the better, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. I know I have a lot of questions about what actually led us higher today. What's going on, especially with some of the crop conditions. You know, there's a decent crop out there in Western Canada, and we'll get Wendy's input on that. Let's bring her in here. Wendy, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Shaun. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Well, who isn't good on a day where the market's up like it was? The great day to be on the show.
It's great. I'm a grain buyer at heart, and today is a good day to be a grain buyer. If you're a grain buyer, you came into work this morning with your farmers' target price agreements hitting and green on the screen and lots of harvest action happening. So it's just a really fun day to be a grain buyer. There's no doubt about it. This is
Now,
what we live for.
is this an example of why you put in targets, Wendy, is a day like this? Because some farmers would probably look at the negative of it, like, oh, look, it blew through my target. I gave up 10 cents. Or is this more
That
of the
is
positive where it like actually helps you?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. It is comical to watch sometimes because marketing grain is such an emotional decision-making process for farmers, and it's a hard decision-making process for farmers. So I always have a lot of empathy for them. But yeah, you woke up this morning, your target hit, and you probably threw your pen down and said, I sold too low, she's going higher. And I really hope that by the end of our half hour, I convinced them that they haven't. I think today is just a really good day. The timing couldn't be better, that we're just about to go into harvest with majority of Canada good crops. And here's an opportunity for you to earn a few extra pennies. Farmers use target price agreements in different ways. There's sometimes where it's a strategy that you say, oh, I'm going to put it in and maybe it's going to hit because it's 70 cents out of the market or $1 out of the market. You just put it there and forget it about it. And then there are times you put it there because you need it to hit, because you need a sale. So it depends on what your purpose of the target was. But anytime a target hits, I hope a farmer's happy, because that is a sale that you wanted to do at a fair value, is what I always look at them as. But
Okay.
there's lots going on today for us to talk about why the market's going on. I don't even know where to start. I think I'll just start with like some of the macroeconomics pictures that are going on. Today was a big day that the Fed Reserve had their conversations, and a lot came out there just basically saying that the U.S. is going to allow some inflation to start. And with that, those inflation conversations are including some of the food and ag commodities in that. So that is a long-term general positive trend for the market space that we're in with commodities. The trade talks with the U.S. happened this week, and they seem to have gone well. China is purchasing strong commodities. I'm not a believer that they're ever going to fill their phase one agreements, but I mean, we can talk about that for a long time. But, China and the U.S., they did do their trade talks. I still am very nervous. I think the tension between China and U.S. is very high. U.S. blacklisted another 24 Chinese firms today for the work they did in that South China Sea area. There's still so much volatility between the China and U.S. trade relations that we have to be very careful of, wondering how long this Chinese frenzy of buying is going to last.
But it seems that the worse the relationship gets there, the more soybeans China's buying, and funds are starting to become believers as they're starting to get to the long side.
Yeah, big part of today is the funds and the managed money showed up in the marketplace. And I've always said that anytime I talk to anybody, the funds need to be in the marketplace for us to have our prices supported. And anytime we see the big moves, it's because the funds have come in. And the funds are coming in for good reasons. If I was a fund manager, I'd be all over this today too. You've got the U.S. government talking about inflation. You're seeing a decline in crop scores, lots of bad weather discussions. So what are next week's crop scores going to look like? You got the pro farmer tours going on that we anticipate lower crop scores coming out. You have increased demand. honestly, I open up my email every single day. I see China has bought something. There's always some kind of export demand purchase being reported. But the funny thing about that is none of this has actually happened yet. This is all pure speculation. So funds always buy on rumors and sell on fact. So the bottom line question is the balance sheet at the end of the year going to represent what the funds are trading today? Is our prices going to go high enough to ration, because that we need to ration demand? That's why the prices would go higher. So many unknowns, and the funds don't trade on the facts. Funds trade on rumors, and that's what they're doing today. They're in there trading on speculating on crop scores and speculating that this demand will stay. I don't know. Will China stay when South America replenishes supplies in spring, Feb, March? Is China still going to be buyers then? Is our magic question.
So is there enough fun momentum to push canola through this magical 500? If you look at the last week, we've gone from like 483, 485 to we're just below 500, like 498, I believe, on the November contract. So let's get this sucker rolling.
Yeah, I really think that is just such a magical number too, 500. And for November canola futures on the nearby, like with that harvest time frame month to be 500, I really want everyone to understand how important that is, that the nearby month is at 500. May or March of 2021 in that spring time frame hitting 500, that can be normal. But for the harvest month to be at 500 and pushing it is a big statement of the demand that's there for canola. So actually, I have a supply and demand chart for canola up in front of me. And again, it's always the Viterra numbers that I use, which are different than the Stats Canada numbers that I use. So, take them with a grain of salt. I don't want someone to phone in and give me heck on my numbers. These are our internal numbers. And I share them with you guys. Just because there's so much unknown, right? Like our guess is as good as anybody else's guess, like in Stats Canada guess. So I'm using the Viterra numbers that, if we look at this demand, we're on 5 years that we're going to be at 20 million tons of production. The last 3 years, we've been pegging a 4 million ton carryout. So we continue to grow these crops. And even with our China demand problems, we continue to have the supply chomped up. And I find it funny that 4 million tons carryouts just become a normal, that it's okay to have that much carryout. But it is because we have so many questions in the demand side of the equation still. Exports are up, crush is up, and production is up too. So 500 canola futures breaking through it at harvest is a big deal to me. I think that would be a big trend setter, that something's changed significantly in the demand structure for that to happen.
And StatsCan's tighter on their carryout than you are, correct?
Yeah, by about 2 million tons.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the StatsCan number better.
Well, and it's funny, there's multiple analysts out there that have been waiting for Stats Canada to revise their numbers higher, and they don't. So somebody's wrong. I think even if it is 2 million or 4 million, it's irrelevant. They're in really tight hands. I know those farmers. They're not easy guys to get the grain out of. So they got bin doors locked and it's not coming out anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's 2 million or 4 million. Those guys want top dollar for it to get it out of the bin, is definitely the point I'm trying to make there.
Yeah, and a lot of analysts I talk to, they've been, I would say, pretty bullish soybeans here through the summer. Canola seems like it's gaining some bullish momentum, like we've been discussing, especially from a futures perspective. Some things this week that have caught my eye, and it mainly goes to Europe, in the fact that rapeseed crop, it's not great in Europe. We could have another winter here of some really, really good news exports out of Western Canada for canola into the Eurozone.
Yeah, in our Viterra supply and demand table, we are definitely penciling this big European crop. So just to put that into perspective, in 2015, Canada exported 462,000 tons to Europe. In 2019, we exported 2.1 million tons to Europe. And we're forecasting in 2020 that we're going to export 2.7 million tons to Europe.
Up half a million tons.
If you put that on a chart, it's directly corresponding. There's a nice little X occurring where you're watching Europe production go down. And so in Europe production in that same time frame, in 2015, they were producing 21 million tons themselves. And this year, they're expected to produce 16 million tons. So a 5 million ton drop in their rapeseed production there. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's their drought, and that's widely publicized that they're having weather issues. But it's not just that. There's also some government requirements that they're changing some of their regulations. They're changing some regulations in regard to the varieties that the farmers are allowed to grow, the GMO use that they're allowed to grow, what pesticides and herbicides that they're allowed to grow in the regulations. I'm not an expert on it, but I do know that that is affecting the acres that the farmers are seeding as well in Europe. My point there is that I think this is a long-term change. I don't think that Europe is a flash in the pan, that we're going to stop supplying Europe this 2 million tons. I think this is a long-term demand, and this is what has supported canola prices. One of the factors that have supported canola prices through this is this strong European demand to increase that 2 million tons, and everybody sees that it's a long-term effect. The other thing that I find really interesting on the canola supply and demand table, specifically demand, is we're supplying Europe with 2 million tons that we didn't last years. And that is directly the amount that we've lost from China with our China canola issues that are going there. So in 2015, we were exporting 4 million tons of canola to China. And our forecast, well, this year it looks like we exported 1.9 million tons, and we're probably going to export about 2 million tons in 2020. So Europe has completely made up for the shortfall of our Chinese canola issues that we've run into.
Just imagine if we got the China market, like we started rolling back there again, and we put Europe and China back, like put those two volumes together, we would be we'd be in really good shape.
Well, maybe you can help with those Chinese relations somehow and get that back. I don't know what we're going to have to do to get those Chinese relations back, but they are finding ways. So Europe is one of the things that is, and I want to point out, I have to put a plug in there that everybody on the show understands. In order for us to send rapeseed or canola to Europe, it has to be certified sustainable. So if you don't know what the sustainability program is, make sure you talk to one of your grain buyers and see if your farm can be certified as a sustainable farm, because that's the only way we can send the product into Europe, is it being sustainable. Part of the government regulations and mandates that they have with their voters' beliefs. Yeah. So on the flip side of that, when we were talking about China, that is the other thing that's holding this canola up. So Chinese canola seed purchases are down 2 million tons, but Chinese oil purchases from Canada are up significantly. So your crush margins.
Imagine that.
Yeah, so if you look at a chart of the Chinese oil futures, I wish I could show you it on my screen because it's just such a huge rally that's been happening in the Chinese oil futures. The Chinese have a major, vegetable oil shortage. So we talk about palm oil rallying, but I would rather you guys look at the Chinese vegetable oil chart, and they just have a huge shortage that has been driving canola oil exports up. And it's keeping our Canadian crushers operating at full speed. Often you'll see a crusher shut down in the summer months for maintenance, and nobody's shutting down. There's excellent margins being made at a crush plant, so they're going to keep going. But this demand is going to also keep futures volatile. So when we talk about pushing that 500, I always want to put a little bit of caution into people when I'm talking about Europe buying and I'm talking about China buying. When they're buying from us, they're buying futures, right? And that's rallying the market up when they're buying futures. Eventually, their needs get met. And when their needs get met and they don't show up to buy in that futures market, it just slowly deflates. And that's where we see our farmer customers going, hey, we were on a canola rally and we were at 500 and you were offering me 1050 canola. And now I'm in a month later and it's down at 975, 980. What happened? And it's if that demand doesn't show up, it slowly deflates. And then you have to wait. If you're a farmer, you have to wait for either another buying event to happen from these end users to cause that market to rally up again. Or you need the funds in there. If the funds are in there like today, then it's a good day. Then the funds can support that market. But if the funds aren't in there or an end user aren't in there, we're just going to deflate again.
Okay, so increased demand, having to pull it from the countryside, is it affecting your basis at all?
Yeah, well, right now it is definitely affecting our nearby basis levels. So if you're a farmer that is looking for harvest space, I hope you either already booked it and have your grain contract pre-booked. If you took some of that risk on, did your grain contract before it was in the bin, you got a better basis level. Even now, some of the territories and areas of Canada that don't have 100%, aren't combining or aren't close to combining, there's some risk premiums in the basis levels. So, but then once the harvest starts, no doubt our basis levels get wider as our capacity fills up, as our elevators fill up, the demand for our space is really strong. But look out into our deferred months, because any grain company, you go to December forward and their basis levels are very attractive to try to get farmers to keep it on the farm during the September to Nov timeframe. And the futures have carry in them to reward the farmer, as well as the grain company's basis levels have a reward in there as well for you.
Hey, Wendy, question here from Brian Voth. He says, to get a 20 million metric ton crop this year, you must be using a 44 to 45 bushels per acre average yield. Is that true?
Yeah, we're using an R yield right now, 44.5 bushels per acre.
Oh, there you go, right in the middle. Beauty.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thanks a lot for the question, Brian. Appreciate it. Hey, Wendy, I want to get to some comments you made to me earlier today about Russia. And of course, when we're talking about wheat exports, we know that the Black Sea region is such a competitor on the global stage for wheat exports, and Russia's having some success as of late on some of these tenders.
Yeah, the Egypt gas tenders are publicized every week, so it's a great way to get a global outlook of what's happening from a global perspective in the marketplace. Tuesday was one of the largest tenders. Oh, I don't even know how far back I'd have to go, but it was a massive tender that gas offered out. And so 530,000 metric tons of wheat, or sorry, 530,000 tons, forget my million, of wheat was offered out. And Russia won that purchase. So that means now that Russia has accounted for over 80% of that Egyptian business tenders that they have won. So there's been 2.8 million metric tons of tenders offered out, and Russia's got 2.29 million metric tons of that. So that just really goes to show our number one competitor continues to be this Russian wheat. There are gas tenders that have been very aggressive. This is, again, just like our other stories, demand is very good for the wheat as well. The tenders are 35% ahead of last year's pace. So Egypt has bought 35% more than they did last year at this time. And from this last tender I was talking about, the tender price that won it of the Russian wheat, because prices are made public as well, it was $6 per ton higher than the previous tender that gas put out.
Wow.
And that really goes to show that that wheat market was rallying there and those wheat markets were being up. We've also seen demand that's been in the marketplace. We've seen tenders from Egypt, Pakistan, Taiwan, Japan. Turkey's out with a big tender. So everybody is looking for some wheat right now. Probably a big part of that is a low US dollar. That's really helping an interest in commodities. It makes some sense for these countries to do some purchasing right now. North American supply, the US winter wheat is complete harvest, essentially. We'll call it complete. So there's a big supply for them to play with. So they're feeling like it's time for them. They've been waiting. They've been going hand to mouth all summer long, these companies, these end users. And now the governments are saying, okay, the supply is replenished, US dollars down, good time to buy. And we're seeing that in the demand for the global wheat.
So what does that mean for Canadian wheat heading in here to our sales season? You know, we saw Ag Canada raise the production forecast here as of late. We're hearing from a lot of the farmers we talked to that there's a pretty good crop out there. You know, in some areas it's okay, but in other areas it's pretty darn good. We don't have a good idea about the quality yet, but what do you think it means going forward here for this sales season?
Yeah, well, wheat traditionally in Canada, and I guess I'll speak specifically to Viterra because that's where I know the world best. January forward is when we get heavy demand for our wheat shipping. So Canada did release their numbers on Tuesday. They called the wheat number 34.9 million metric tons. That's 2.5 million tons higher than last year. And that's actually 1.3 million tons higher than the last update they sent out. So that's them increasing these yields that you were talking about. So, I think this really goes to show we've got the supply here in Canada. You're right, we don't know the quality, but traditionally Canada does have a better quality than that Russian Black Sea wheat and the US winter wheat. And we have a specific end use market that wants our wheat for blender stocks. So there's going to always be that demand for that high quality, high protein wheat. And that's a special market. That's always our blender stocks. But even this last year with some of our falling number problems, knock on wood, please do not let us have another falling number problem this year. But, assuming that everything is going to be okay in our the early samples that we're seeing coming out on wheat and the tours that are being done right now, we're having a drier harvest than normal. Grades look good so far. We haven't seen a fusarium or falling number problem, but that's just very early samples that we've been seeing coming in. We're not in a full-fledged harvest that we can make a broad statement. But from September harvest till December, our wheat shipping is about half of what it is come January forward. So again, that's a really important opportunity for farmers to know that. I share that with you because I really want farmers to have a look about what you're selling at harvest, what you're saving your bin space for, what is the best return to put in the bin versus just move it at harvest time. And just really understand that the wheat shipping comes to Canada January forward, and the prices reflect that. I think if you go into the pricing for wheat, once you get into January, there's a significant carry in not only the futures, but the basis levels as well. So moving your your wheat selling purchases to the new year might be a really good play, and think about moving more peas or barley or canola or something else front end loaded for your space.
So what is that spread between selling September, October versus January, Feb?
So September so I'll give you Saskatoon prices.
Okay, good. Yep.
Saskatoon today, one red 13.5. There's just about $6 a bushel, and if you go into the summer months, they're $6.75 a bushel.
Ooh, that might be worth it.
Yeah, and same thing, with canola. If you're looking for that harvest space, again, I'm looking Saskatoon, depending on your location, right? I cover a big geography. It's about 10.40 versus if you're looking into the summer months, you can get $11 a bushel in at any of the locations in the summer months. You may have to go to March to July, depending on how far you are away from Vancouver Port. But there's $11 canola available to you today out in the summer months. And I always encourage farmers, we book that now. If you see $7 wheat in the summer or $11 canola in the summer, that's because we're paying you to store it now. As we get closer to that time frame in that month, that carry erodes and that premium in the basis erodes. So we offer these prices, and then sometimes you don't take them now, and then we chase them all year long to get back to those prices again. So we're offering you $11 today for July delivery. And instead of chasing $11 all year long, just wrap it up today. And I'm not saying do all of your grain contracts, obviously, but some of it, right? Instead of chasing that magic price all year long, look at those deferreds and don't think we're going to be $11 come July. We might not be there at that time.
And I'm going off memory here, but I believe the Durham production numbers up like 35% year over year forecasted. Obviously, that has to do with more acres, but also better yields this year in the Durham Belt in southwestern Saskatchewan and southern Alberta. What do you think about Durham demand? Is it there to tie up that extra supply?
Durham Demand's a little bit different because it's that very high-end, high quality, and price expectations of Durham are very much higher from the farmers. So the farmers in that Durham growing belt have had ideal growing conditions this year. So when I look at wheat, there's pockets that have had poor growing conditions. So I can go to northern Alberta, I can go to Peace Country, northern Saskatchewan. There's pockets that have a serious issue. I want to make sure I do point that out. There are places in northern Alberta and northern Peace that are really devastated with the flooding and just ridiculous amount of moisture that's happening. But on the Durham front, there's a patch there in Canada that has had ideal growing conditions, and that's the Durham land. Now, because of the history of Durham growers and any of the Durham growers that were around during the Canadian Wheat Board days, they've always stored their Durham. So they're not afraid to store Durham and wait for the high prices, and that's what the Durham grower will do again. If the demand's not there, they'll just lock their bin doors and wait for that price again. I don't think the demand is high enough to meet the large durum crop that has been growing in Canada. But I also have confidence in the durum growers that they tend to bin that grain anyway.
Yeah, we had I can't remember who we were talking, what analyst we were talking to one time here on the show. They talked about how durum growers are like the Charlton Heston of farmers. You can try to rip it from my cold, dead hands. Something like that.
That's right. Canary seed growers too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's nothing to store a couple year of crop. Question here. Just hold on here. Question here from Brian. Do you think Canadian farmers can continue to compete in the wheat market with Russia and South America production doing what it is?
Yeah, I think Brian probably knows the answer to that question already. I definitely, we just watched let's just talk about Russia and the Black Sea region. I don't think that they're at the level of expertise of farming and agronomic practices that a Canadian farmer is. So should the Russian farmer and the government and the infrastructure in that geography get up to a near, even close to the level of what we have here in Canada and North America, they're going to be growing a massive amount of production that will just drive these prices of wheat to extremely low areas. As well, the question is always about their quality, because they've always produced a poor quality crop in that area as well. But we just see year over year their quality increase as well. So Black Sea and Russia have always been huge competitors for Canadian wheat, and that is only increase as they adapt to new technologies, and I think government invests in infrastructure as well there. So long-term, big problem. Wheat's essentially a grass that can be grown in many areas of the globe. So it's if you look at, I always look at the World Grain Production Calendar. There's a Viterra World Grain Production Calendar you can get off our website. I tell everybody you should have that printed off on your desk to just see the seasonals. But if you look on wheat, there is a crop being harvested every month somewhere on the globe of wheat. So it's not like the soybeans where we have this September timeframe and October timeframe in the US, and then we have February and March in Brazil. And other than that, we have supply shortages. Wheat just has a constant supply coming somewhere globally throughout the year. So continued prices being lower for Canadian farmers. But saying that, somebody's had a crop wreck somewhere every year that has kept the supply tight. Globally, the numbers that are being produced globally, like instead of just looking at what's the number I have? Sorry, I'm sort of stumbling with my numbers. So there was a 28 million metric ton increase in acres in seeded production, and then there was also a 25 million ton decrease in production. Overall, that still means we gained 3 million tons. So even if Europe had a huge crop wreck and the European numbers were down, let me get my chart here. So European Union was down 19 million tons of production this year in wheat. Sounds like a wreck, sounds awful, but Australia was up 11. And Russia was up 4, and India was up another 4. So that more than makes up for the shortfall somewhere else in the globe of Europeans' disaster that they've had this year.
It kind of is the most liquid supply of any of the crops, right? There's just constantly adjustments to the global balance sheet every month.
That's right. It's just arbitrage will occur. So if Russia has a bumper crop, somewhere in the globe might have a poorer crop, and arbitrage will occur to go to where the product is.
What about corn and beans? That's an interesting mix, like it is every year. It gets such the focus. It's such a driver of the market. We had the Pro Farmer Crop Tour last week. I believe Brian and Chip revised their estimate down to like 177 and change. They're below USDA. What are your thoughts there? Is the story just China, China, China?
Yeah, I think the story's just demand. And will the funds stay into play for how long? Because there's no doubt the supply is enough. So the supply is going to be enough. So the magic question is at the end of all, so we don't know the production yet. I tend to lean that the production's very high. I don't know if the corn's 181 bushels per acre, and it's really interesting to watch what's going to happen on these pro farmers tours after they see the scores of the big windstorms going through and the dryness and the results. But I always find that the opportunity is during this what ifs. What is that yield going to be? And that's where we need to be making our selling decisions and our marketing decisions for the farmers, is during this what if time. Because at the end of the day, the supply is going to be whatever it's going to be come harvest completion time. So by October 31st, we're going to know pretty close what the global harvest is, and we'll have that number pegged in our supply table, in our supply and demand tables. Then the question just becomes demand. So is it 181 bushels of corn? Is it 53 bushels of soybean? Is it going to be 8 or 5 less? Regardless, those are all big numbers, and it's going to be dependent on demand. We haven't even had a talk about African swine fever or COVID and that impact on demand. Today, we are speculating that everything is going to remain normal and that we will have these continued demand stories. Should something happen, whether it's an economic crisis or another health crisis with COVID or African ASF, and demand stops, now we have burdensome supplies. So that's why I always say we sort of have to strike while the iron's hot. We have great opportunities today that we're forecasting good demand. We have questionable production. Get some grain contracts and some business done during this time instead of waiting to see what the actual results are. Funds buy the rumors and sell the facts. Don't ever forget that. The funds are in there today on rumors. When the facts actually happen, they're selling it off and we see a drop. Don't get caught in that.
Do you think is it a good or bad thing in your opinion, Wendy, that we're so reliant on the funds to move the market? Like, it works for us in situations like this, but it definitely works against us as they have been, being so short the market. So how should we look at this?
I always look as the funds are a positive. That's my belief. The funds are a good news story. When the funds show up in the marketplace, this is an opportunity for farmers. So we would be stuck in this sideways trend. If you look at a seasonal chart, a seasonal wheat chart has us stuck in a sideways trend from now until, I'll pull up my seasonal chart. It's until April that the seasonal chart just has us in a sideways trend. Well, on that sideways trend, what the funds let me do is, instead of just being at the bottom of that trend line all the time, the funds allow me as a farmer or as a grain buyer to participate at these high prices up here. So when the funds come in, they'll drag it up to that technical resistance level on a chart, and that gives me an opportunity. It might be 20 cents, it might be 50 cents in a real stuck but sideways trading range. But if I'm watching that action and that increased volatility, I can participate on the high end of the trading ranges because of the funds. Without the funds, that just becomes a very boring line. So they give us great opportunity. Now they give us volatility. So that's where I don't want to come across as I'm thinking, yes, I'm very bullish prices. Yes, I think there's a lot of things that are good happening here, but I don't even want to say I'm bullish prices. I see good reasons why prices are going to be supported for the rest of this crop year. And they're going to be in that bound range. And there'll be opportunities for you guys to, as farmers, to hit that high end of the trade bound range and keep these prices supported. There isn't a lot that I can say today of why the market would deflate for a long-term trend right now.
Volatility brings opportunity. Ken has a question. You mentioned COVID-19. How has COVID affected malt demand? Any chance of contracted overage being sold as malt?
Definitely. I don't know if you're talking about contracted overage for old crop or if you're talking about the new crop business. We're sort of in that limbo time. But definitely COVID has greatly affected especially the craft brewery industry. So that's where we see our domestic barley market really take a hit. So if you tend to sell to the domestic maltsters, which Viterra does too, we supply the domestic maltsters, we see that business really come down. And that's because of a lot of the upside in malt was in the previous years, we've seen these craft brewery industry really take off, and we've seen the demand for the domestic malt with this craft beer industry take off. COVID has essentially killed that industry. And even when you go into the export business, we do a lot of exports, obviously being Viterra, and we've had some very successful export business on the books for new crop malt barley. But it is limited because there's still a fear from the end users of how much do they buy. When COVID hit China in March, I'm not sure if people understand that, like, they literally shut down their economy. It wasn't like us where we were still sort of moving around. They locked it down and nothing was happening in March during their COVID. And there's a fear from the end user of how much do I want to buy if that happened again from a Chinese end user. So malt barley, I know we had contracts at Viterra on the forward books at $5-ish for malt barley for those farmers that were able to take on the risk of forward contracting it. It's a little bit quieter now because it's harvest season. We need to take care of those first sales that we did with our farmers, but we do see export demand for malt barley to stay firm throughout the year still.
Are you following? Sorry, go ahead. Finish off.
I was going to say, in his question about the contract overage, I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, but if he has a really high-priced contract, the overage doesn't get sold at that same contract. It'll get sold at today's market value is how our process works.
Okay. Also a question here from Ken on flax. I've been getting calls from buyers as of late. Is it demand increasing or is the crop not going to be as big as expected? I know my yield will be a little bit lower.
Flax is a demand story, and it's good news because last year flax prices were through the moon. We had great flax pricing all year, and then that actually increased seeded acres. I don't have it on my chart right now, but we did see an increase in flax acres grown in Canada because of last year's price increase, and that will continue. So people will continue to look for your flax. There still isn't enough acres being grown for the current flax demand that's happening right now in Canada. So yeah, definitely a demand story in flax, and that's with increased acres as well. So good news story on flax.
That's good. It's kind of like oats, isn't it? Flax and oats, aren't they a little bit similar in that regard?
I know. I talked to you a while ago, and I thought for new crop that oats was the best commodity to grow. You asked me, what's the commodity to grow next year? And I said, oats. Oats is my good news story. And then I actually wanted to take that back because I felt like every farmer in Western Canada was growing oats. And I was like, oh, no, like everybody's growing oats with these prices. But it is the same thing. We saw oats acres increase based on good pricing, and we still see oat demand. Now, I have to be careful with what I say because for those of you with oats that are about to be harvested, yes, you're sitting in a good spot. We have export business for oats, but that doesn't happen every year. If the export business for oats dries up and they go to Black Sea or they go somewhere else and it becomes a domestic oat market only, now there's way too much oats in Canada for that marketplace. So the oats price is 100% dependent on us maintaining exports. And we can price ourselves out of that market. So we can't get too greedy on our oat prices because we price ourselves out of the export market. And then we can't rely just on domestic. We get way too much supply then.
Well, I know one thing. Whatever this crop adds up to and whatever exports are going to be, the railway system has cleaned itself out. It has had a fabulous end to the crop year. We're going to have a lot of capacity to move forward here if we have good sales this year.
Yeah, that's one thing about the poor oil prices and the lack of demand from our COVID world. It has freed up rail cars for grain shipping. We can have as many rail cars as we seem to need throughout the summer months. We'll see how it goes throughout harvest. We do have, that is going to be very geographic specific, Shaun, because there's some areas that we talked about that have very large crops, and those guys might feel like the capacity, I mean, there's only so many trains that can get unloaded in Vancouver. There's only so many trains that can go through the Rocky Mountains and get unloaded in Thunder Bay as well. So there is a logistical, a capacity that does get reached. And some of those areas with really high crops, you might see plugged elevators as we wait for rail cars. But there's other areas that, we don't have the same large crops, so they'll get excellent rail shipping during those times. Just be aware that during those very important harvest times, we could get plugged up for a bit.
Hey, Wendy, this has been a lot of fun. If somebody wants more information from yourself or Viterra, where do they go?
Yeah, you can just go on to Viterra.com. There's a Your Opinion Matters. You can put questions on there, or call your local Viterra rep. There's a grain buyer there that can get a hold of me and answer any questions that you want.
Fantastic stuff. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Wendy.
Great talking to you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today in our discussion with Wendy White of Viterra. Next week, we got another great lineup of shows. We're going to continue going with RealAg Live. Hopefully, we're going to spread this out actually and do 5 a week starting in early, maybe mid-September. That's kind of the plan. I'm really looking forward to it. These are a lot of fun. I appreciate the questions from the audience. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll chat again next week. Cheers, everyone.